Hello everyone, let's get started. This is Jintao Zhang, your lecturer for this semester. It is a little bit odd to start the lecture this way, but unfortunately we couldn't do it via Zoom at this moment. Hopefully we could get it back online soon. Anyway, well, I would like to start with some self-introduction to give you some brief impression of who is the lecturer. As mentioned, my name is Jintao Zhang. I was born in China. I acquired a PhD in management from University of Newcastle, Australia. University of Newcastle is a really good university. I think it's around the 200 according to the QS ranking year 2019. But it seems not many Chinese are very familiar with this university, which I believe the university didn't do well in promoting himself in China. I also have 2 master degrees from the University of Sydney back in year 2009, one in international business, another in accounting, master of accounting. I acquired my bachelor degree, honor degree, from Northumbria University, which is located in Newcastle again, but that Newcastle is from the United Kingdom. So it seems I am an international student, has been traveling around a lot for the past 15 years. I started my academic career by teaching business and management related course since the year 2009. I have been served several universities, include University of Newcastle, Australian Catholic University, Monash University, Kent Institute Australia, and Beijing Normal University Zhuhai campus in mainland China. In terms of research, my special interest is in corporate social responsibility, the CSR for short. I read up my thesis, PhD thesis, about corporate social responsibility. And I also want to do some research in the future about the ethics of the artificial intelligence. It's the ethic issues of AI, which is quite a hot topic at this moment. So if you are interested in these research areas, please feel free to send me a letter, email, or send me some message so we could have some decent discussion on these kind of topics. Well, this is my first semester teaching in Torrens University. Trying something new online. Hopefully we could do this well. Wish we could get along well for the whole semester. Okay, that's about myself. If you get any question, feel free to leave a message or leave a note or something. Thank you for that. Let's proceed on the second topic. Well, the second is about the unit. The unit is management, people, and teams, which is one unit under the course Master of Business Administration. By learning this unit, students are required to have a good understanding of organizational behaviors, politics, organizations' dynamics, and the environment around organizations. By environment, we are not just referred to natural environment. It's more about the business environment. The students are also required to understand the impacts of the just mentioned factors on the roles of the management functions. This subject will help us to understand the constraints we face as a manager and an emerging leader and how we are going to develop strategies to leverage advantage and overcome constraints and barriers in the organizations. So I believe this is a subject quite practical as well as theoretical. I'm going to introduce a lot of organizational theories as well as some organization practices. I believe some of the students might be very experienced in these kind of areas because I don't have many industrial experience in this sense. So you are encouraged to share your personal experience with us. I believe that is also a very important concept within the MBA classes. So the third thing I want to talk about before I start the lecture is the modules included in this unit. There are 6 modules. The rule of management in contemporary organization. The second one is workplace communication and change. The third one is recruitment, selection, and management talent. The fourth one is developing people and teams. Fifth one is strategic people management, innovation, and culture. And the last one is organization, system, and the legal obligations. So these 6 modules will be carried out gradually in 12 weeks. And normally each 2 weeks we will cover for one module. I will provide the detailed information to the Blackboard. You could download and you could read it through by the side of these PPT slides. You will know exactly what I'm talking about here. Well, the second is about the unit. The unit is management, people, and teams, which is one unit under the course Master of Business Administration. By learning this unit, students are required to have a good understanding of organizational behaviors, politics, organizations' dynamics, and the environment around organizations. By environment, we are not just referred to natural environment. It's more about the business environment. The students are also required to understand the impacts of the just mentioned factors on the roles of the management functions. This subject will help us to understand the constraints we face as a manager and an emerging leader, and how we are going to develop strategies to leverage advantage and overcome constraints and barriers in the organizations. So I believe this is a subject quite practical as well as theoretical. I'm going to introduce a lot of organizational theories as well as some organization practices. I believe some of the students might be very experienced in these kind of areas because I don't have many industrial experience in this sense. So you are encouraged to share your personal experience with us. I believe that is also a very important concept within the MBA classes. So the third thing I want to talk about before I start the lecture is the modules included in this unit. There are 6 modules. The rule of management in contemporary organization. The second one is workplace communication and change. The third one is recruitment, selection, and management talent. The fourth one is developing people and teams. Fifth one is strategic people management, innovation, and culture. And the last one is organization, system, and the legal obligations. So these 6 modules will be carried out gradually in 12 weeks. And normally each 2 weeks we will cover for one module. I will provide the detailed information to the Blackboard. You could download and you could read it through by the side of these PPT slides. You will know exactly what I'm talking about at here. Okay, the assessment. It's very important. We need to complete 3 different assessments for this subject to fulfill the requirements of this subject. The good news is we don't have a final examination. All these 3 assessments, which I personally found is quite interesting, they all have different deadlines to submit. So you have to keep in mind the deadlines. I will make it very clear through Blackboard. I would like to run the different session about the assessment. I just leave it for now because I think it's better to do this face-to-face instead of pre-recorded ones. Okay, that's about the introduction. If you got any question, just send me some feedbacks. I probably could make it clearer in the next session. Well, I think that is enough of introduction. Let's start the lecture for this week. In this week, we're going to cover the Module 1.1 of Module 1. Within Module 1, we have 2 different modules. Module 1 is talking about the role of management in contemporary organizations. And this week, we'll focus on the nature of organizations and the environment. And next week, we're going to look at the motivations, how the managers or how the institutions is going to influence the others. We're talking about the power and the politics. So this week we'll focus on Module 1.1 only. Learning objectives for this week. First of all, students are expected to define and distinguish the concepts of organizational theories and organizational behavior. There are definitely some difference between the theories and how people behave. The second, students are expected to distinguish an open system from a closed system of organization. For some who are not familiar with what open system is, maybe you're already being involved in such a system. This is a quite important concept, especially for the modernized organization. Not only you're required to know what is an organizational open system, but you also have to identify the key characteristics of such an open system. And third, students are required to understand the organizational life cycle perspective. I believe most of you guys have heard about these concepts from all different sources. Maybe from a marketing course, you will see something called the product life cycle of a product. The product life cycle is talking about how the product is first launched and the growth stage, in the mature stage, and in the decline stage. Just like every human beings. This is also very important for organization as well. We are going to identify a life cycle stage of an organization in this chapter. The fourth, we're going to identify the major behavioral science disciplines that contribute to organizational studies. So business is about dealing with people, and people has their own thought. And there are several behavioral science subjects which study people extensively. For example, the psychology, sociology, social psychology, or anthropology. These are the subjects has been studying people for thousands of years. And we're trying to borrow some well-established argument from those disciplines into our study, the organizational behavior, trying to make the decision-making process more scientific. That is the point of this subject. And the last one, we're going to require the student to identify the challenges and opportunities managers have in the modern organization. I believe some of you already mid-level or senior level management members, so this is very important to you guys as well. So you need to identify what would be the new opportunity and what would be the potential barriers, constraints, or the challenges to your company. You are trying to avoid these kind of things, and you need to try to seize the opportunity. But it's not like every opportunity we're talking about. We are talking about the challenges and opportunities within the organization, which is more related to organizational behaviors, organizational theories. So that's the learning objectives. Okay, well, the source of materials. The contents of this lecture are prepared primarily based on the following resources. Chapter 1 of the book Robbins and Barwell, published in year 2006, Organization Theories, Concepts and Cases, 5th edition, which is quite old book, but still very good ones. And the second primary source is the chapter 1, Robbins and Judd, published in year 2016. The book is The Essentials of Organization Behavior, 13th or 14th edition from Pearson. I believe you could access to the 14th edition of the second book through the Torrens library. It's a digital version. And you could also find the Chinese version of the second book from some online bookstores, which is quite cheap. I got one of those and I asked them send from China to Australia to me, and I got that within 2 weeks, which is quite handy. This is one of the best thing people living in China could enjoy, the fast delivery. Well, I believe some of the students might have learned a course called Organizational Behavior, and why organizational behavior is different from our current course, the Management People and the Teams. Organizational behavior is an undergraduate level unit which primarily gives some basic information of what is the organization. But in MGT 600, Management People and the Teams, we're trying to combine organizational theories and organizational behaviors. So I made a chart here. If you have a close look, you will see that organizational theories are primarily from a macro perspective, and organizational behaviors is primarily from a internal point of view, to argue how the people need to be managed or sort of things. Okay, here we go. Point 1.1. Nature of organization. According to the definition, an organization is consciously managed and coordinated social entity with an identifiable boundary, which functions on a relatively continuous base to achieve a common goal or set of goals. Please make notes on these sentences. The first one is consciously managed and coordinated social entity. A group of people just randomly grouped together. For example, they were dancing and on the playground together along with the music. They are not an organization. You have to be consciously managed. There must be someone or some mechanism existing there to serve the purpose of a coordination. This is the very first thing, very important to organization. The second one is identifiable boundary. It's not the physical boundary like the office. it has the limits, the constraints of the organizational structures. So who will be included in this organization, who are not. And the third very important thing is that continuous based to achieve common goals or set of goals. You must have the objective. You must have something which is out there for these organizations to achieve. So 3 sentences are already underlined there for you. First thing, consciously. Second, identifiable boundary. And the third is continuous base to achieve goals. Well, as mentioned, organizations need to have identifiable boundaries. And those boundaries will be the outside of the organizational structure. So organizational structure is quite straightforward. It is the structure within the organization, but it is very important. It defines how tasks are to be allocated, and it defines the areas of responsibilities and authorities, the reporting relationships, and the formal coordinating mechanisms and interaction patterns that will be followed. It can be addressed from these 3 different criteria. First, complexity. Second, formalization. And the third, centralization. First one, the complexity deals with the divisions within the organization. That could be different among different organizations. For example, if you're running a small company only dealing with one product, have a few people, you don't have a very complex organizational structure. For example, you might only have one team, one sales team to sell one product to a specific customer. That would be simply easy and straightforward. But how about if you're running a large company, an international company, for example, the Citigroup? The Citibank has the headquarters in North America, and it has multiple branches in China, almost everywhere around the world. So for such a big company, organizational structure is very important, because that will allocate the authorities, will specify the responsibilities of each person. And you might have the human resource management department, the accounting department within the same organization. And organizational structure in such large multinational corporations is trying to dealing with this kind of issue. And the second one is the formalization, is to what extent the organization is formally organized. That said, whether the organization is very easygoing or the organization is rigid. For example, I use IBM, which is a North American company. The company have a very rigid requirement, company policy, reporting system, the hierarchies within the organization. So you could see it from the computer they designed a couple of years ago. So everyone was wearing black, signing suits, ties, getting to the office. Maybe with a standard black cup of coffee. But on the other hand, we use Google as the opposite example. So Google is quite flexible. It's not that formalized. It's still a formal organization, but in terms of the organizational structure, they might allow a little bit of flexibility. So you could vary whatever, not actually whatever, but as long as it's suitable to go to work. That is to illustrate the formalization. And the last one is centralization, is to what extent the organization is controlled by the headquarters. Most of the Chinese companies, to the best of my understanding, is quite centralized. Nowadays, there are some companies that start to delegate the powers to the branches, but still, compared to most of the Western company, the Chinese company are known to be centralized, just like the political system. It has its pros and cons for sure. Everything has good and bad argument. Centralization has the good attribute that once you want to apply something, once you want to do a investment, do a research development, that would be quite flexible and quite quick, fast. For example, the 5th generation of telecommunication, which is quite solid in China, and people started to build up all these towers and to send all the signals, and people in China may already enjoy the benefit of the modern technology. But in Australia, which is decentralized, in North America, it's just decentralized. It will take people a long time to debate on that, and it will take a long time for the authorities to start to build up all these facilities to apply the next generation of telecommunication. So I'm saying that, especially in business, we're not trying to see good and bad. We're trying to see it's all different, and we're using pros and cons to identify whether which would be a better option. The system perspective. The modern academic view organization as a system. The original definition of a system is a set of interrelated and interdependent parts which interact to produce a unified output, which is quite similar to the definition of a organization. So, organization is an example of a system. There are a lot of other definitions fit system definition. For example, we could see a machine is a system. A machine which is making dumpling is a system. It's a set of interrelated mechanism movement, and which contains interdependent components, and it will produce a dumpling. Yes, a machine is a system. But here in this class, we are talking about organization. We're talking about an open system and a closed system. An open system is quite modern argument, which is defined as the open system recognizes the interactions of system which is environmental and its dependency upon it. On the other hand, the closed system is a self-contained system that has no interaction with the environment. I'll give you a simple example. A people living in a village without the internet connection, not talking to people, I will primarily consider that people is quite close-minded. Why we're saying that? Because that is a self-contained system. That people has no interactions to others, to the outside world. But people was traveling around the world. They could talk to people, they could highly engage in the different environments, situations. That is the people who probably has an open-minded system. So we'll see that people has an open system in his or her mind. So I'm applying this concept to the organization as well. Back in 50 years ago, most of the Chinese companies are considered as a closed system. They don't have much interaction with each other. So most of the companies, they will have this own self-department, which is carries all the way from the products being produced to products being output. So they need everything to produce something within the organization. But later, when the open system start to influence the organization, people start to outsourcing. That's to cooperate with the others, either the suppliers or the distributors or even the competitors. So once you open up your arms and you start to receive the helps, or you start to cooperate with others, that will fulfill the definition of interrelated. then that become an open system. So we need to know the concepts of open system. I believe most of the organization at this moment are following the open system concepts, but we still have a little bit of resistance to believe that it's better to get everything done by itself. Again, we have the pros and the cons about each argument. Closed system has its advantage for sure. Open system has a disadvantage for sure. We could debate on that a lot, but yeah, for now, I just explain the basic concepts, and we might debate it a little bit next week when I can see you in person. It would be a little bit abstract if I'm just talking about the open and closed system. This figure demonstrate what an open system should looks like. So we will have here the input, like the raw materials, human resource, capitals, technology, or the information into the organization. Then the organization is a transformation process. It utilizes the employees' work activities, management activities, technology operation method onto the input raw materials, trying to deliver the output of the product, service, a financial result, or input, or human result, or something. So this organization is surrounded by the external environment. Remember, this chapter we are talking about the environment. We're talking about what factors could affect a company. One of the most important learning objectives is to know the environment of the organization. So that's why the open system is very important, because environment is important affecting the organization, and we need to analyze, address the factors contained by the external environment. And within this chart, you could see there is a little feedback was sending from the output back to the input. That means if we found the final product from raw material got some issues, we could always go back and order different material, which is normally what we're doing in the organization. But this chart shows the basic concepts. So from this chart, let's sum up two things you could see. First, the organization is a system which is processing the input and deliver it to the output. And the second thing is the organization should be an open system, because you need something in, you need something out, and the organization system need to be influenced by the external environment. Two very important things from this figure 1.1. Well, this is a better chart to illustrate the external environmental influence to the organization as an open system. Okay, the first part of this chart is quite identical to figure 1.1. You could see the input and output, but we will see that when the output is delivered to the final customers, we also has been influenced by the financial institutions, the labor force, the suppliers, the government. I believe the government is quite important in China when you're running a business, especially the policies. Sometimes the government, the local domestic government, could be quite influential to your business. There's a lot of stories. I'd rather not to talk about it, because I believe for some who has the good experience by organizing your company in China, you will definitely understand what I'm trying to see here. So the government influence is inevitably noticeable. And also there might be some other influence from the financial institutions. For example, you are borrowing a lot of money running your business. And every morning you wake up, you believe that, okay, I need to pay like $1,000, even $100,000 back to the the bank interest, but that's quite normal anywhere around the world. So the financial institutions serves these kind of functions to boosting up the local economy, which is not a completely bad thing, but they will have a very strong influence to the organization. For example, the credit rating. There was a scandal a couple years ago with some of the North American and the world reputable companies. They were trying to do some flaw in their accounting, and they were being caught by doing something which is not good. So all the financial institutions trying to read the credit ability of these organizations down from, for example, A minus down to B minus down to C. So there was no other financial institute could borrow more money to these companies when there was something wrong with the liquid financial within the organization. The company simply go bankruptcy. And labor forces, I'm not sure how important the labor force in China at this moment, but they are very strong. In Australia, in North America, for example, the United States, as the labor forces almost could dominate the economies. They could easily say, okay, the labor unions, they must say, okay, let's don't go to work tomorrow, let's just stay ran a propaganda around against something. They could simply do that. For example, you might have heard the North American primary education was not really good, especially United States, because the higher school teaching, the teachers union was very strong. They're trying to overprotect the benefit of the high school teacher or the primary school teachers. Once you've been employed in the North American as a high school teacher for more than 3 years, just like you were tenure tracked, they can't fire you. If you don't have a really good performance in one school, the next year you will be simply transferred to a different school but get the same amount of payment. And this policy was being forced by the labor union, the teachers union, which is really, really strong labor union, one of them in the North America. So labor forces are very important, and the suppliers for sure. And if you have multiple suppliers, we are talking about Porter's 5 forces, the bargaining power of suppliers. If you have multiple suppliers, it's okay, you could increase your own bargaining power and reduce the suppliers' bargaining power. But however, if you have only 1 or 2 suppliers, then you might have to consider about the importance relationship between you and the a single or the oligopoly suppliers. So we need to deal with this kind of thing. Another example of the supplier is nowadays there was something quite important we call the green corporate social responsibility or green supply chain management. So we need good materials, we need good raw materials, packaging, and better designs from the suppliers. We need to consider the suppliers into the supply chain management, even to the customer relationship management as well. Okay, once we know what an open system is, we're trying to recognize all the characteristics of an open system. First of all is environment awareness. Does the company know the environment around it? Does the company know what is going on in the future? Does the company know what is the current and modernized technology which is going to replace your current technology? For example, a better way of delivering. For example, most of the banks in China nowadays they realize the modernized payment method like WeChat Pay or Alipay is going to replace the traditional way of Visa, Master, and Union Pay. They need to know this kind of situation and trying to make a roadmap of their future development. If you just close the doors and trying to build up the organization, build up your business on your own, it's easy for you to get lost in doing the business. A second one is feedback. When we produce something, for example, we provide a service or produce a product, we always need to know what would be feedback from the customers. Do you think this is good? How do you think about the taste of the coffee? So we could continuously improve the product or improve the quality of the service. Well, the third one is cyclical characteristics. As shown in the previous chapter, so the output of the organization could contribute and feedback all the way to the input of it. So it becomes a closed circle. That's why it is called a cyclical characteristics. So we need to collect all the feedbacks. And we not only collected the feedback, we need to incorporate, we need to utilize all the feedbacks into the input to make a continuous improvement. That is exactly what is talking about in the fourth characteristic, the tendency towards growth. The thing is, when we collect all the information from the output, that is the feedback, and we utilize all these feedbacks and put it back into the input section of the organization, then these motive will enable the tendency towards growth. Steady state. There is generally a balance between inputs from the environment and those expended to counteract the winding down of the system. This results in a relatively steady state with the characters of the system remain almost unchanged over a long period of time. For example, most of the motor vehicle and oil companies, although involved in major interactions in their environment, maintain the characteristics over many years. And we have been using the engines for more than 30 years. The current version was continuously developed by the previous one, and only up to a couple of years ago we start to switch from the traditional petrol or diesel engine to a electricity engine strategic cars. So if you look back to the automobile industry, it was quite steady, although it is the open system. But the open system doesn't mean you need to change consistently. It depends on certain situations. Another characteristic of an open system is movement towards growth and expansion. Later, we're going to mention something called organization life cycle. And when one industry or one sector is winding down, the organization needs to find a different way to come back to the game. So movement towards growth and expansion is very important for sure. But one point I would like to make is movement towards growth and expansion is not like you create something which is completely new. It's just like imitate your current business model and trying to reapply your current business model into a different sector or different industry or different country. I think that is quite common all around the world at this moment. For example, if some famous people, they start a restaurant and they will just use the title and open the chain stores all over the country, and it become very popular. So open systems, you could do this. And if you're saying, okay, Jintao, some company do some diversification. That is a different topic of open system, which we called that is the strategic management. And the company need to spend a lot of money and effort to develop a new way of doing things. But here, for an open system argument, the movement towards growth and expansion is merely imitate the identical business pattern of the current one and reapply it in a different situation. So the balance of maintenance and adaptive activity. First, let me define what maintenance activity is. Maintenance activities ensures that the various subsystems are in balance and that the total system conforms to its environment. These prevent rapid change that may unbalance the system. On the other hand, adaptive activities are necessary so that the system can adjust over time to variations in internal and external demands. So, when the company is organized, managers always keep in mind that whether we need to maintain the current standards to maintain a balance of the organization to move forward gradually, or there is a rapid change that we need to adopt to new environmental activities. For example, the new technologies coming, the new materials coming, a better updated version of software is coming, whether we should adopt it or not. But once we adopt it, we might lose the advantage of using economic scale of the current system, which may be still very good in use. So manager need to make the decision, do the calculation, and finalize the decision, which would be a better way. So open system doesn't limit which way to go. Open system give you the concept that you need to do a balance between these two kinds of different activities. So the last characteristic of the open system is the equifinality. The concept of equifinality argues that a system can be reached the same final state from different initial conditions and by a variety of paths. This means that an organization system can accomplish its objectives with varied input and transformation process. That different car companies can use different designs and product method and be organized in different ways, but still produce a mass market cars. So I'm trying to say here is there is not a standard or the single way to approach something. There's always an alternative, which is quite different from the in general belief of the Chinese society. Something from my personal experience, because I got all the students from China trying to ask me like, Jintao, do you have a standard answer for this question, and why my assignment is marked this way? Can you provide me a description like why you marking that and how you mark it? I'm saying that, well, in the Western world, we might not have a standard answer, because you could answer the question in your own way, and the different way of answering will achieve the same thing. That is the exactly concepts of this point in the open system. As I mentioned, that not only our organization is an open system, and every human beings could have an open mind system as well. So we could consider ourselves a human being as an open system or a closed system as well. So that example was saying that you could achieve the same result by different way of doing things. I believe nowadays more and more Chinese start to realize this kind of situation. They're trying to not following a rigid format and instructions and trying to do business in a different way. That is really good. So we are trying to say that let the market decide what kind of business you're going to do. It's not like the plan decide what your business you're going to do. Subtopic 1.3, the life cycle perspective. We're going to introduce the definition of life cycle of the organization. As I mentioned before, some of the students might be quite familiar with the concepts of the product life cycle or the market life cycle. I could give you an example, like I used to have this Walkman made by Sony. Now actually not Sony, it's a company merged by Sony like 20 years ago, the company called Ava. I'm not sure whether you guys are familiar with the brand or not. So yeah, I used to love that Walkman very much, and later a new modernized technology has been introduced, we call it MP3. Then everyone just switched from the Walkman, which is using cassette, to the digitalized musical instrument like the MP3 or the MD or the CDs. And nowadays we are utilized all these functions into Apple mobile phones, and now it's Apple mobile phone generation 11 already. So for example of these cassette MP3 play, and it's not the cassette Walkman players, it reaches to the end of its life cycle. And I believe I still have some of these tapes at home, but I don't even have a device to play with it. That is a good example of product life cycle. Yes, that means the product is going to discontinue from the market. And another example is about cars. Nowadays we're still using the traditional oil cars like the petrol ones or diesel ones, and nowadays we're trying to slightly change to the electricity cars. And there are a few countries has already announced that by the end of year 2030s or by the year end 2040s, they are going to discontinue all the traditional fuel cars and switch to all of the national vehicles to the electricity ones. And that would be an example in the future about how the automobile industry is going to decline in their sales. But an organizational life cycle refers to the pattern of the predictable change through which the organization moves from startup to dissolution. Here we go. This is a good example of what an organizational life cycle is. It's identical. So we will have the entrepreneurial stage, which is quite preliminary, and we will have very ambitious goals and high creativity. For example, when Steve Jobs first introduced the iPhone 3, I think that is around the year 2004, 2006. So by that time, that company, the company already existed for a long time, but for that particular model, that is still in the entrepreneurial stage. And later, we moved into the collective stage, so that become informal communication and structural and high commitment. Everyone just pay their attention to the development, and everyone have a high engagement commitment towards the organization. Then when the company become larger, we become the formalization and the control stage, as everything become formal, and we going to issue a lot of laws, policies to rule the organization, to write a lot of job descriptions and allocate each job position and ask the people to do the exact things which is described by the policies, which is quite important for large companies. So at this stage, the company will enter into the maturity stage, the mature stage. And later we moved into the stage which is we will call elaboration of the structure stage, which is a very complex structure, which is going to be decentralized, and it's going to get into a different industry, because you might achieved into a certain position which you will be one of the best company in this industry at this stage. So what you do, if you want to still going to expand, you might need to diversify it into a different industry. For example, there was a company called Virgin Blue company. So it's a really good company for the cheap flight industry, and nowadays they started different gyms for people to do exercise, and also I think the company opens up a different division which produce music, like online music and publish different music. So that company now have at least 4 different branches, as I mentioned before: the air flight, the gymnasium, the music, and I believe the company is also doing some restaurants. So that company is a good example of diversification. And then the company will reach to the last stage, the decline stage. So there was a high employee turnover, increased conflicts. It's a kind of a stage that the company is just decision, and the company sales is declining, the company is going to close down. We have been seeing a lot of these examples. The most obvious example is if you go back and look at the history of the whole China from like 2000 years ago. In each dynasty, the dynasty will went through exactly, if you treat the dynasty as the organization will went through exactly the same shape of the life circle, and you could apply all the definitions of each stage to this dynasty, which is quite similar and quite analytical. So I have mentioned the organizational theory in the previous slides. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this lecture, there are differences between organizational theory and organizational behavior. Organizational theory is primarily from a micro, the external, the overall standpoint to view an organization. Says the organization should do something. But organizational behavior is more like from an individual or the group point of view, which is one level down within the organization. So we are talking about the motivations to leaders, to the customers, to your employees. We're talking about leader behavior and the powers. We're talking about how the leader is going to influence the others. What would be a good characteristic of a leader? What would be the good attribute of a leader? The traits, the behaviors, the concepts and the theories of leadership. And we also talk about interpersonal communication, so like how you get along with the others, how you're going to communicate in different levels, and which could be very different in different organizations. For example, I could give you an example like in Australia, we are a very first name based society. By a first name based society, that means you call me Jin Tao instead of call me Mr. or Dr. Zhang, or you call me even my position like professors or something. No, Jin Tao is a preferred name in Australia. Even I call my boss line manager, I got the name, I call the giving name, not the family name, not the position. But I believe the situation in China would be different. You need to call the position and followed by the family name. So that is a kind of interpersonal communication. That is kind of international differences, or the differences within different organizations. So you may ask me, what will happen if a Chinese in Australia, how will Chinese behave? Honestly, I had this problem for a long time. I don't know whether I should call the supervisors or the line managers the first name or the last name. I feel that it's very respectful to call them with their position and followed by the given name. And I've been meeting several people which work in China, which is Aussie, which is originally from Australia. And they told me that they get used to the environment in China. They call them their possession. They call them their family names to show the respect. So I will see that use this example to illustrate the differences between different organizations in terms of the interpersonal communication. This is only one example. We have a lot, like whether everyone shouldn't make any joke, or everyone should create a very diversified environment, and this could be very detailed. We're going to introduce that later in this semester, but I just leave it for now. Then we're going to talk about the group structures in the process and how the organization is grouped. In some organizations, they were using a very flat organizational structure, and the example is the organizations of the most Australian company. They're quite flat. Normally there's only 1 or 2 layers of management. I know exactly who the CEO is. I could talk to the CEO. I got invited into parties, and yeah, that's just a kind of a flight structure. And some of them quite a high hierarchical structures, which normally typically a Japanese organization, Korea organization, or an Indian organization, and Chinese organization as well. And a group structure would be exactly followed this kind of structure as well, whether we will have some project management, we will have some groups who work for the organizations, how the group is organized, whether everyone will have the similar position in ranking, or the group is also organized following the organization hierarchy or not. And we're talking about the next one is the attitude development and the perceptions. This is quite a psychological point to talk about the organizational behavior. We should talk about the individual's attitude and how to improve the attitudes of individuals and ask them to contribute more to their work. This kind of thing. The next one is the changing process, which to primarily talk about the resistance to change. When there is something new, and people always don't want to change for sure. And there is a lot of reasons and a lot of argument which is talking about why people don't want to change. You could do a simple search that says why people don't want to change any website, and there is a lot of reasons. And just people feel that uncertainty, that people inconvenient, and that they just get used to the normal environment they like, which is go against with the open system I introduced in a couple of slides before, but people just have this kind of things or attribute within them. So next is the conflicts and the negotiations. We were educated, by the Chinese have been educated to avoid conflicts and not directly to their negotiations. So we are trying to be polite and not very direct to our opinions in the negotiation. So that's pretty much in what the North Americas have been encountered in this kind of issues when they are talking to the Japanese, North Korean peoples, and even the Chinese. So they found, okay, we raise these issues and we want something feedback, direct feedback, and the people from the Great Asian areas has been highly influenced by the Confucianism, by the Chinese traditional philosophy. They don't want to provide the direct feedback, so they need to have somehow guess why the guest or the other side of the negotiation parties is behave this way. But in the organization, both could be right. So we are trying to avoid these conflicts to maintain a harmony environment, but to promote kind of conflicts is also a good way to get things done. But as I mentioned, there was always pro and cons. It depends on what kind of situation. And also the last one is the work designs. We are talking about job enlargement, job rotation, on this sort of things. For example, in Foxconn, there was a lot of people around their age of 19. I believe there's a factory in Henan province. The Foxconn got a factory with 200,000 people in that facility premises. Everyone was working in those premises and around their age of 19 or 20s. And they should have a lot of dream, but what they're doing every day is just repeating some pointless things every day, and they will get bored. So job rotation, job enlargement is kind of dealing with this kind of issue. I still remember that there was a decades ago, there were 13 young people jumped out from tall building within Foxconn and killed themselves because the job design was very boring, and they lost the confidence or lost interest of living in this world. So that happened a lot, not in Foxconn, and it happened a lot in the Western world as well. People will simply lose this kind of passion towards life if the job was designed too boring, and if the people are asked to do the things repetitively for 365 days for 10 years. So organizational behavior is more dealing with the individuals within the organization rather than from the overall point of view. So by introduction of these PPT slides, I hope the students will have a clear understanding of the organizational theories and organizational behaviors. Okay, well, this subunit 1.5 disciplines of organizational behavior field. So these are the fields which contribute to the study of OB, one of my personal favorite field. I have a strong interest in the philosophy studies. I've been very into the ancestors back to the Greek and the Roma period, like Plato's, Epicurus, and I've been studying a lot of the Chinese and ancient philosopher as well. So I found this is very interesting for some people who really likes philosophy, who really likes debate, and you could pay more attention on this chapter as well. So there are primarily 4 disciplines which contribute the most of organizational behavior study. First of all is psychology. Psychology seeks to measure, explain, and sometimes change the behavior of humans and other animals. Contributors who add to the knowledge of organizational behaviors are learning theorists, personalized theories, and consulting psychologists, and the most important, industrial and organizational psychologists. So these people was studying the organizations, studying the industries, studying the individuals within the organization, the industry. So those behaviors could contribute to a management. I can give you an example, like when Taylor wrote the book The Scientific Management in the year 1911, that is the symbol of the modernized management course started. So he did a psychological study of how to motivate the employees. He found a very strong guys and trying to move all the iron acid from one place to the other place, and he redesigned the motivation system to improve the productivity, and that became the standard process in the North America. And Henry Ford, the founder of Ford Motor, actually applied this scientific approach from Taylor in their Ford industry, and made the Ford car very popular in North America. So that is a good example of how psychology could contribute to organizational behavior and the management. And also we have the social psychology, which is considered a branch of psychology, but it's a kind of interrelated psychology between people. So sometimes it's between psychology and sociology. The sociology is study people in relation to their social environment and the culture. Instead of study individual, they study a group of people. For example, study Chinese, why the Chinese behave like that, and study Japanese, study Indians, and study North American people. So they will study a group of people instead of one single individual. And anthropology. Anthropology is the study of scientists to learn about the human beings and their activities, the entire human beings, ignore of individuals or a group of them, just look back to thousands of years, see the historical reasons and why the people behave like that. There must be an explanation behind every phenomenon, behind every notion. So I will provide you a chart in the next slides to give you detailed ideas of what are these disciplines. Figure 1.4 toward an OB disciplines. This might be a better chart which explains in more details of how these four behavioral science categories could contribute to organizational behavior. For example, the psychologists will contribute to the theories we are going to learn in organizational behavior, such as the learning theory, motivation theories, personalities, emotions, and perceptions. So there was a lot of scientists. They studied how the people learn things that will help the company to do training, and the motivations for sure is help the company to build a good reward system, trying to motivate the people to do certain things, and the personality to explain why people have this kind of personal trait, and emotions, explain the people's behavior and people are emotional, and these will also help the leadership effectiveness if we could fulfill the requirements, potential requirement of the employees, and that will also achieve a job satisfaction. As mentioned, job satisfaction are very important in modernized organizations. And also that will contribute to the individual decision-making, performance, attitudes, employee selections, and that will also in the result how you design a job, how you test a job, how you reach a job. And the social psychology will contribute to the behavioral change, why people start to change their behavior. For example, the current generation, which was born in the 1990s, will definitely from the people born in the 1980s, 1970s. So when the company developed a certain policies based on group of people in the 1970s, so these kinds of regulations may not be well applied to the people was born in the 1990s, which there was 20 years gap. So social psychology is trying to deal with this problem. For example, we might have to change our working attitudes. I believe there was a joke in China. I've been seeing that from a lot of media. They said you could easily blame a guy which is middle-aged, around his 40s, in the office. You could tell him that have to work till the midnight, you can't go home after you finish that, you could simply tell these kind of things to a middle-aged guy because he or she need to pay the mortgage to the bank, he or she need to support the family, the kids, a lot of things. So he or she could not afford to lose this job. But you couldn't do the similar things to a young people who was born in 1990s or in the year around 20s, because they could simply quit the job and said, okay, you are fired, boss. I'm not going to come back next day. So that is a kind of behavioral change of different generations, and managers need to keep in mind. So social psychology is dealing with a group of people, and the sociology, as I mentioned, that will dealing with the communication, the powers, the conflicts, and intergroup behaviors, and also need to deal and also can contribute to the organizational techniques, organizational cultures changes. That is how these kind of things were formed within the organization. Sociology are very important in business, organizational behavior, especially we're dealing with international business. I have been involved in multiple international trading and international communication negotiation situations. I know people will have different ideas, perceptions. As I mentioned, the perception is in the psychology cube. They will have different perceptions, expectations. For example, the punctuality. Australians is not really time sensible. So for example, you will see I will have a party at 8 o'clock. The people may arrive to start from 8:05 or 8:10, even 30 minutes late, which is good. But in Australian, people will think that is not really polite if you come earlier. So there is a philosophy behind it, is we are going to prepare a party for everyone. We can only get ready by 8. If you come earlier, like 30 minutes earlier than the party, so you will caught us which is still preparing this thing. So which is not polite. You are trying to harsh the hoster to move faster. That is kind of not a polite thing. But in China, we might be arrived like 10 minutes earlier. It's kind of a common practice that we want to show the respect. We don't want to be late. And this is a kind of a cultural or the sociology issues. And the scientists that study this could contribute to that area. Anthropology, which is studying the cross-cultural analysis and the organizational culture again, and which is kind of have overlap with the sociology as well, because most of the sociology results was derived from anthropology, because you couldn't talk about the society without considering of the history. So the 4 behavioral science are interrelated, although they have different names, but there is a lot of overlaps. So if you are asked like what kind of science could contribute to organizational behavior, organizational theory, remember these 4. That will be the primarily 4 areas with starting from the pure science which contribute to the business environment. And again, you need to pay attention to that the psychology is dealing with the individuals. The social psychology, the sociology is dealing with the groups. And anthropology is explaining how the organization system is built up, which is more like the organizational theory side. Then they all contribute to the study of organizational behavior. Well, attention here. I have to make these important notes here. Human beings are complex. There is no, I said it a few, but I believe there's no simple and universal principles explain organizational behaviors, because human beings are not alike. Our ability to make simple, accurate, and sweeping generalizations are very limited. So if you heard something, some people saying that just follow these golden rules and the human being behaviors will be explained that is not true, because we are complex. That might apply in general for most of the people or for certain periods, but that has a lot of rigid condition to apply such simple rules. And second one is, it does mean that organizational behavior concept must reflect situational. That is very important. You need to put your discussion into a certain scenario. You can't discuss something without a background. That doesn't make sense in organizational behavior or in any business course, business strategy, management principle. Remember, contingent theory is very important. You need conditions. So we can see, use this sentence, we can see X, someone, leads to Y, something, but only under conditions specified in Z. That is the contingent variables. Another example is to see that if we were going to talk about the people in China has the general behavior like that, we could see that in that province, about this age group, they have been educated in something like that. So under a condition X, that might lead to a outcome Y. So that is how you're going to describe these kind of things. One of the very last topic I want to cover within the lecture of this week is the response to external environmental pressures. As a manager of the organization, people need to deal with the pressures such as economic pressures, globalizations, workforce diversities, customer service, employee trainings, networked organizations, employee well-being, work environment, ethical behaviors. Economic pressures would be the primary ones for managers to deal with. There might be goes up or goes down. If the external environment, economic environment is better, for example, the current situation in China, there are a lot of opportunities for managers to catch up. And that is a kind of pressure for the managers to catch up this kind of opportunity. If that goes down or quite stable, like the situation in Australia, it's better just maintain the current status quo to keep the business running and looking for business opportunities. Keep your eyes open, mind open, and looking for these opportunities. So which different kind of strategy? Globalization is, of course, inevitably noticeable for sure. So everything is internationalized at this moment. I'm from China. I'm wearing the clothes made in China, and speaking English, and I'm watching the comedies from United States. I'm driving a car from Germany, so everything is internationalized. And nowadays we're doing education online, and I'm delivering the unit online as well. I found this is really interesting, and the reason I accepted this job is because I think this is kind of the future of the education. Trying to deliver all the knowledge online and through the platform and to the people which is 10,000 kilometers away. This is a good example of environmental pressures under the globalization. You could import your raw materials from a different country, and you could sell your finished product in a different country as well. Managers may already been highly involved in such a situation. Workforce diversity. Honestly, China, the working environment in China is not a highly diversified working environment. I have been to different countries like United States, UK, Australia, Malaysia, China, yes, a lot of them. I found Australia is quite a diversified society. You could find the people with different skins, talking different language, with different beliefs, and still get along well with each other. The thing for the Chinese business environment is everyone speaks the same language, from the similar background, and there's few foreigners was in the group, and even there are some, they are elite already. So the workforce diversity at this moment in China is not really popular, but I believe in the future, if globalization is continuously goes up, I think most of the Chinese company need to pay attention to the workforce diversities, not only to the people who are from a different background, also the minorities, the people with disables, for example, people can't see, people can't talk, people can't walk well, need wheelchairs, and people not really good with their brains, or people are not well educated. So this issue are still underwater at this moment in China, but I think in future that would be coming out in no time. Customer service, well, this I should say that the Chinese companies did really well in customer service in some industries, especially the online things. But for the traditional industries like the car service and the traditional department stores, the developed countries such as in Australia are still very good ahead on that. Employment trainings, whether the company need to put the employee in certain trainings to acquire certain knowledge, and if there was something changed, whether the managers need to send their employees to certain development seminars to increase their skills. Networked organizations is, as I mentioned, every company is networked, and I believe there is. I know there are a few Chinese companies they don't even have a website, but they have a close work relationship with some of the Australian government and provide very basic materials for the highway infrastructure production, like the little reflective mirrors. And those companies made a lot of money there, but they are closely networked, linked with these Australian company, but they were just not really B2C companies, and they will still make a lot of money, and they're very good in their business. Employee well-beings, of course, there was a lot of pressures for that. There was a lot of requirements from the employees asking for a better compensation or better payments. It's becoming popular in the future and becoming more precious to the organization. In the past 1 or 2 decades, the Chinese are very hardworking. They are not requires a lot of things, but when the economy becomes stable and when the company become big, large, the organization, the managers need to think about how to compensate the employees, how to think about the well-beings of the employees. So just link it back to the organization life cycle. When the organization entered into the mature stage, these are the things the managers need to think about. Working environment. Whether the working environment is good for the employees to stay in there or not. So I can give you an example. I used to work for one of this company located in Sydney in the CBD. They have this tall building, very beautiful building, a very good location. But I couldn't stay in that environment for more than 1 hour because the oxygen in the atmosphere within that building was quite low and my body can't adapt to that situation. So after every 30 or 1 hour, 30 minutes or 1 hour, I need to go downstairs and have a breath of the fresh air. Otherwise, I'll feel very dizzy. So that working environment is talking about the setup of the organization's office, whether they have a better airflows, whether the people using polite language, even whether they have a staff kitchen, which is distinct from the people which outside the organization. So that environment become very important at this moment as well. And the last thing is one major is ethical behaviors. Ethical behavior is whether the organization is doing things right. For example, Google uses a slogan that's "Don't be evil." That is the slogan for Google. So that is a quite ethical slogan. Says we do everything which is right. Of course, that slogan has been criticized when they are trying to provide some information to the Pentagon, to the White House or something, but that was a couple months ago. Yep. Ethical behaviors, like whether the company is doing things that are polluting the environment, whether the company doing something is jeopardize the benefit of the employee or not. And if we have some more time, I would like to go into detail of ethical behaviors. I'm sure that we'll have a chapter later. So I just leave it for now. Let's proceed to the very last slides. Last of all, an overview of a basic organizational behavior model. We have input, process, and output, and at 3 different levels: individual level, group level, and organizational level. Each category contains certain topics. For example, the group level and the process, we will have communication, leadership, power, and politics, conflict, and negotiations. And the individual of the outcomes, we will have the attitudes, task performance, the organization citizenship, and these kind of things. We are going to cover most of the topics shows in this table in this semester. So pretty much the very first week is going to give you guys a basic idea what organizational theory is, or what organizational behavior is. Yes, the topic of this chapter is called management, people, and the team, but the essence is organizational behavior, organizational theories. It's a combination, but it's an advanced course of organizational behavior. And it also depends on the way how the lecture and how the unit course outline is designed to deliver the certain knowledge and keep it up to a postgraduate level. Yeah, I think I think this would be all for the very first chapter in the very first week. Again, I feel a little bit odd to deliver a course like this. I pre-recorded once. I really like to see some faces. I really like to see the people and have some interactions. But unfortunately, since we don't have this connection, and I hope I could get connected to you guys soon next week. Yeah, thank you very much for listening, and wish you all good. I see you next week.